But the real question that Colin and I had while researching for this episode was, has anyone ever been murdered at Disney World? And while the official answer is no, there have definitely been a few incidents that have crossed that line. Take, for example, the murder that occurred near Disney's Pleasure Island shopping complex on New Year's Day in 1992. On that day, 21-year-old David Mark Eldert had been visiting an ex-girlfriend of his when her new lover showed up. There was an altercation between the two men, and the new boyfriend ended up shooting David 5 times, killing him. He then dumped his body in a grassy area near the parking lot of the shopping center. It turns out that David's killer was a man named Christopher Fenn, who was a Walt Disney World employee at the time. Eventually, Christopher was convicted for David's murder.
Another incident that occurred on Disney World property happened in that same year, 1992. In the fall of that year, a 37-year-old man named Alan J. Ferris approached the Epcot theme park on the Walt Disney World property after closing one Saturday night and demanded that the security guards let him inside. That night, Alan was in search of his ex-girlfriend, who he knew worked at the park, but he was denied entry. The two had recently broken up after she ended their 8-year relationship, and Alan hadn't taken this too well. In fact, at the time, he was already under a court order to avoid his ex-girlfriend because she felt he was a danger to her. That evening, upon learning that he wouldn't be seeing his former lover, Alan pulled out a 12-gauge shotgun from his tote bag and fired 3 times at the nearest security guard, who took off running into the park uninjured. The 2 other security guards also took off running, but stopped in their places after more shots were fired. Alan, knowing that his time was running out, then took the 2 remaining guards hostage inside of a nearby restroom for 10 minutes, while making demands to sheriff's deputies who swarmed the area. But eventually, he released the security officials, slowly stepped out from the bathroom, placed the shotgun to his head, and pulled the trigger.
Sadly, Disney has seen a lot of suicides over the years. If you've ever stayed on property at Walt Disney World, then you'll probably know the Contemporary Resort, as so many of the monorail lines that you ride during your stay include stops at the hotel. The Contemporary Resort is a tall trapezoid-shaped building with a large atrium in the center. It's filled with restaurants, gift shops, and guest suites. However, in recent years, it's become a beacon for those who want to take their lives at the happiest place on Earth. In March of 2020, a woman jumped to her death from a high floor inside of the hotel, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Another suicide occurred in the same way in 2016 and in 2014. And back in 1992, an accident occurred at the hotel when a Disney employee was startled by wasps while on the observation deck. Trying to get away from them, she fell to her death hundreds of feet below. Now, typically, when someone dies at Disney in this type of manner, employees will quickly cover the body with a tent and place signs in the area informing guests to, quote, pardon our dust.
We'll never truly know just how many people have died on Walt Disney World property, but before we move on to the Disney-related family annihilation, there are a few more dark incidents that occurred at Disney World that we want to discuss. If you remember, back in 2016, an extremely tragic event occurred at the Grand Floridian Resort. 2016, in general, was a tragic year for Orlando, and the month of June 2016 was one that the residents of the city would never forget. On June 10, 2016, former Voice contestant and singer Christina Grimmie was gunned down and killed by an obsessed fan who then immediately committed suicide while she was signing autographs at the Plaza Live, one of Orlando's oldest theaters. Christina's murder was shocking and quickly became national news. Then, just 2 days later, on June 12, 2016, a man walked into the Pulse nightclub in Orlando and opened fire, killing 49 people and injuring 53 more in what would become America's deadliest mass shooting at the time. After the horrific massacre at the Pulse nightclub and the murder of a national celebrity in the short span of just a few days, Orlando and the rest of the nation were already deeply hurting. And just 3 days after that, on June 15, 2016, that same darkness would fall upon the happiest place on Earth. On that evening, 4-year-old Lance Graves was building sandcastles on the beach near Bay Lake with his parents, sitting close to the shore of nearby Seven Seas Lagoon, Disney's massive man-made lake. The family had chosen to build sandcastles and play on the beach that night, as the outdoor movie showing that they had planned on attending had been canceled due to inclement weather. At one point, 4-year-old Lane, who weighed only 30 pounds and stood only 37 inches tall, waded into the water to collect some water in a bucket so that he could continue building his sandcastle. Lane's father, Matt, was sitting only a few feet away with his wife, Melissa, and the couple's other child, Lane's 4-year-old sister, Ella. The family had traveled down to Disney World from Nebraska, hoping to spend some quality family time together. But sadly, their vacation would abruptly be cut short that evening. Matt was sitting on the beach with the rest of his family when he heard a splash from Lane's direction. At first, Matt thought that the splash was caused by a fish, but to his horror, when he looked over in the direction of the noise, he watched as an alligator erupted out of the water and bit down on his son's head. Immediately, Matt jumped into action and attacked the alligator, attempting to pry open its jaws to free his son. But in only a matter of seconds, the alligator retreated back into the water with young Lane in its jaws and sank down into the murky depths. This incident was witnessed by dozens of families who had gathered at the beach that evening, and Lane's entire family. Lane's body wouldn't be recovered for another 16 hours, and an eventual report would state that the boy died from a traumatic neck injury and drowned. Since Lane's death, Disney, under intense public scrutiny, has now closed off access to the beach with newly formed rock outcroppings and barriers, and they've also posted large, bright warning signs warning families about the presence of alligators and snakes in the lake.
Another accident involving the lakes at Disney occurred at the now defunct Walt Disney World water park, River Country. River Country was Disney World's first water park, and some historians even credit it as being the first themed water park to ever be built. Opened in 1976, River Country was a southern-themed water park with water slides, rope swings, and multiple swimming areas. The park was situated on the shore of nearby Bay Lake, and it was meant to have a country feel. Disney engineers actually figured out a way to use real lake water in some of the park's swimming areas. The water was pumped directly from the lake, filtered, and then fed back into one of the pools through the water slides. At first, River Country was a massive success and saw over 4,700 guests a day during its first few years of operation. But as we've seen throughout this episode, darkness always seems to pay Disney a visit. In the year 1980, a young 11-year-old boy was swimming in the park's pool that utilized lake water and somehow got the water up his nose. Unbeknownst to him and his family, inside of this water was a deadly brain-eating amoeba that quickly infected the boy's nervous system and brain. And just a few days after swimming at River Country, the boy died. After the child's death, the filters were upgraded, payouts were made, and people moved on.
But just 2 years later, in 1982, a 14-year-old boy would drown in the same lake water after riding one of the park's water slides. And just a few more years later, in 1989, a 13-year-old died at the park, once again, by drowning. It seemed like River Country really was cursed. In the 90s, Walt Disney World banned all forms of swimming in its lakes due to a number of safety concerns. And then, it happened. September 1st, 2001. River Country closed for the season for maintenance, and just a week and a half later came the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. After the terrorist attacks, tourist revenue in the United States plummeted, and Disney had to make the tough decision to limit the operating hours of its parks. And to save money, Disney also kept River Country permanently closed when it came time to open again for the 2002 summer season. And ever since that day, September 1st, 2001, River Country has remained closed, empty, and forgotten. Images of the now abandoned water park captured by intrepid urban explorers are absolutely bone-chilling. The former pools are now filled with green, murky water and have become ecosystems of their own. The water slides are crumbling, dirty, broken, and dry. There are souvenir cups littering the ground, deflated rafts hanging from trees, and picnic benches where families used to eat their meals flipped upside down. It truly is a creepy, haunting sight. We're going to post some of the pictures of this abandoned area on our Instagram, once again at Murder in America, so be sure to follow our account to see just how spooky this place really does look nowadays.
Walt Disney World also, unsurprisingly, has a pedophile problem. In 2014, reporters from the news network CNN published their report after a 6-month-long investigation, which discovered that at least 35 Disney employees had been arrested for possession of child pornography, sex crimes against children, or attempting to meet minors for sex from 2008 to 2014. And the details of some of these crimes are downright disturbing. One man named Robert Kingsolver, a repairman who worked on the theme park rides, was caught red-handed at a sting house, a la Catch a Predator, after setting up a sexual encounter with a 14-year-old girl. Apparently, in his chat logs, he had used his connection to Disney as a way to attempt to build trust with the victim. Another man, Alan Traster, who was a concierge at the Animal Kingdom Lodge Resort, told who he thought was a 14-year-old boy that he wanted to, quote, fulfill a fantasy of being a big teddy bear for a younger chaser. Here is some audio from CNN's report on Disney predators.
We begin, though, with a report that you won't see anywhere else. It's where every child's dream comes true, where you're supposed to feel safe and kids can be kids. As parents, you're going to want to pay close attention to our next story. It's an investigation involving child sex predators in some of the most famous theme parks in this country. Now, as you're getting ready to pack the family van and head to Central Florida's Disney World, Universal Studios, or even SeaWorld, you want to see what we found in our 6-month investigation. We're talking about a pattern of theme park employees arrested in sex stings after work hours. Here's CNN investigative correspondent Kira Phillips.
They are people you would least expect. Some are married with children.
I've been on Craigslist looking for a friend.
Others have been working with children for years.
I work around kids all the time at Disney.
This man even admits to having sex with an underage teen before getting caught.
Talk and kiss.
All of them employees at Florida's Walt Disney World, known as the happiest place on earth. All of them arrested. A CNN investigation found since 2006, at least 35 Disney employees have been arrested for sex crimes against children, trying to meet minors for sex, or for possession of child pornography.
Do you think that it was wrong to come here to meet a 14-year-old?
This is 40-year-old Alan Treaster, who police say advertised himself online as Big Teddy Bear for Younger Chaser. He was a concierge at Disney's Animal Kingdom Lodge, previously working the Toy Story ride. This is Treaster getting arrested after police say he showed up to meet what he thought was a 14-year-old boy, hoping, according to his text messages, to fulfill a fantasy.
Right here.
Treaster was actually communicating with an undercover detective. He has pled not guilty. However, listen to what he tells detectives during his interrogation. He actually confesses to having sex with a teenage boy just 3.5 weeks before this Polk County sting.
But you still went there for that, to have sex with him, knowing that he was 15 years old.
Was that another fantasy? I mean, I was, again, a younger age, so...
Okay.
That's right. Treaster admits he drove to Georgia to have sex with a 15-year-old boy he met online.
My life is ruined. My family's life is ruined.
49-year-old Robert Kingsolver was a maintenance supervisor at Disney's Magic Kingdom. monitoring and fixing rides like Teacups, Winnie the Pooh, and It's a Small World. He says he loved his job, especially the children.
To see the look on the children's faces, when they get to see, Prince Charming or maybe running into Mickey. That was the best part, is just seeing kids glow and seeing their heroes.
That all ended in February when Kingsolver pulled into this driveway, not knowing that he was walking into a sting operation. Within seconds, he is caught and arrested for trying to seduce and lure a 14-year-old child to have sex. Take a look at the graphic text messages between Kingsolver and the undercover detective who was posing as an underage girl. Kingsolver says he's a cuddling and snuggling kind of guy who enjoys giving oral sex.
The bottom line is, obviously, you were talking to an undercover law enforcement officer. You weren't talking to a 14-year-old girl, okay? The bottom line boils down to is that conversations that you had, maybe with the girl later on, was sexual in nature, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Even though he admits to police he wrote the messages,
I was never.
he tells us he was just trying to protect the girl. He has pled not guilty and says his family is standing by him.
My kids know me, and they know how much I care for kids. They know how much I love them, all four of my kids. And they know that their dad is not somebody that would go out and hurt a young child. They know their dad is somebody that would go out and protect a young child at any cost.
And the arrests are continuing. 4 Disney employees were caught in sting operations in just the last 5 weeks. Our investigation reveals year after year, Walt Disney World employees are getting arrested for child porn and in sex stings set up by Florida police agencies. And it's not just maintenance workers like Robert Kingsolver. It's security guards, a performer, a costume maker, even a pastor. This is 50-year-old Cedric Cuthbert, a former custodial manager at Disney World's Port Orleans Resort, and also a pastor. Police say he was downloading child pornography and soliciting a child for sex online while on the clock at Disney, and at the same time writing a sermon for his church.
What do you have to say to the...
Cuthbert pled no contest and was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
I have never done this. I have no bad record. I can't lose my job.
This is 32-year-old Patrick Holgerson, a Disney street performer and VIP tour guide in training. He's seen here in photo after photo posted on his Facebook page. He tried to run from police when they say he showed up to have sex with a 13-year-old boy. It was a sting. Holgerson had engaged in graphic sexual chat, even sending a picture of himself with Mickey Mouse, and it got more explicit from there. Holgerson has pled not guilty. He too told police he was just looking out for the child.
I was going to see if he was really doing this, and I felt it was wrong, and I was going to actually call it in once I left here.
Disney declined our request for an on-camera interview.
We go after these predators with a vengeance.
Grady Judd is the sheriff of neighboring Polk County, known nationally for his aggressive approach to child sex predators.
In recent years, loads of Disney employees have been connected and charged with sex crimes or attempted sex crimes against children. And many of these predators get roasted online and have their images and the details of their crimes blasted out to the world by one renegade sheriff. His name is Grady Judd, and he's the sheriff of Polk County, Florida, a county adjacent to Orange County, where most of Disney World is located. Sheriff Grady Judd frequently holds press conferences to announce the results of sting operations, and he's brutal towards criminals. When speaking to the press, here are a few clips from times where he and his department have captured and exposed Disney employees seeking out kids for sex.
These aren't traditional criminals. 9 of the 12 of these folks don't have a criminal history. Did you hear what I said? 9 of the 12 don't have a criminal history. But what they are doing, these evil people are lurking online and grooming children online to engage them in sexual conduct. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, what would an operation be? Either a pornography investigation, or a predator operation, or a human trafficking operation without a Disney employee. We always have a Disney employee, sometimes more. This is Zachary Hudson. That's right, he's a bus driver for Disney. He did not travel, but he sent nude and lewd pictures of himself. He thought it was to a 15-year-old girl. And he said to her while grooming her, what we said could get us all in trouble. And he said how he would like to wrap his arms around and feel her small, tiny body. Then he said, are you ready for this? You can't make this stuff up. I don't want to sound creepy. Well, you just sounded creepy. He reiterated to what he thought was this little girl that she needed to keep it quiet. It has to be our secret. Because he said, I could go to jail. He said, but I'd risk it for spending some time with you. I'd risk going to jail. Well, when we arrested him, he confessed. Oh, newsflash, this will make Disney extra happy. He was doing this while he was on the clock for Disney. So if your bus was running late at Disney, he was busy taking pictures of himself and talking trash to what he thought was a little girl. And then there's Roger Caddy. He's 53. It's reported to us by him that he makes a 6-figure salary. He's been employed 22 years by Disney. He's a costume manager for Disney. His children of preference are as young as 3 years of age, and he had 24 counts of child pornography. And he's confessed to being in possession of that child pornography. Then there's Donald Merrick. Donald Merrick is 69. What's interesting about Donald is he taught school for 30 years in Maricopa County in Arizona. We've charged him with 16 counts of child porn. And he said he retired here because he loves Disney World and he goes to the theme park 2 or 3 days a week. When he's not at the theme park, he's home with child pornography. And he taught in the school systems for 30 years. Be interesting to know what kind of conduct he might have had in Arizona.
But now that we've explored the darkness behind the Disney parks, the suicides, the ghosts, the murders, and the accidents, let's deep dive into a recent family annihilation case that took place in Disney's utopian community on the outskirts of Disney World. Buckle your seatbelts. It's about to get gruesome. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. So obviously we've been talking about this a lot lately. Mental health is extremely, extremely important. And you got to think of it like your car. Like if you got one car to use for your entire life, you would take care of that car, wouldn't you? You wouldn't be spilling soda everywhere, letting it rot into the carpets and not fix the steering wheel if it's broken. But that's the same way that you should think about your brain, because you only get one of those. And how you care for your mind affects how you experience life. So it's important to invest your time and care into keeping your own mind healthy. There are plenty of ways to support a healthy brain, like learning a new language or working out, but there's also BetterHelp online therapy. Now, I love BetterHelp. I've gone to therapy in person, but I honestly prefer BetterHelp every single time. It is such an amazing service. BetterHelp is online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat only therapy sessions. So you don't have to see anybody on camera if you don't want to. It's so much easier than getting ready for the day and going out to an office. You can access BetterHelp on your phone, on your computer, right at home. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. So if you want to take the next step in improving your mental health, we can help you. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/MIA. That's betterhelp.com/MIA for 10% off your first month. It's a great deal. Now, let's finish out this story.
So the rest of this story takes place in Celebration, Florida. Celebration is a community located in an extremely close proximity to Disney World, which was originally planned, developed, and constructed by the Walt Disney Company in the late 1990s. Celebration was planned by Disney to be the perfect town, where crime was non-existent, neighbors knew each other, and a sense of community was important. In fact, Disney's CEO was a key part of the town's development because he wanted to make history and create a town that extended Walt Disney's vision of what he called an experimental prototype community of tomorrow. So essentially, Celebration was some sort of experiment, an experiment that would eventually go awry.
From the very beginning, Celebration, Florida has been an odd place. All of the downtown buildings, architecturally planned by famous architects from around the world, are almost too picture perfect. They're painted in vibrant pastels and look like a set from a Disney movie, not like your average Floridian small town. At the very beginning of the town's history, a city ordinance was passed that banned all franchises, like Burger King or McDonald's, from opening locations within city limits, and also banned billboards. While this may be a novel idea to consider, residents of the community have complained that it gives the town an almost sterilized, artificial feel. Then there's the notorious Homeowners Association. First of all, there's a laundry list of rules that the 7,000 plus residents of the small town must obey. No two neighboring houses can be built in an architecturally similar fashion. Lawns must be kept perfectly. You cannot have more than 2 cars parked in front of your house at any time. And any changes you want to make to the landscaping of your own house have to be approved by the HOA, or you face a hefty fine. Residents of Celebration have even reported being fined by the HOA for removing their Christmas decorations a day late. Because, yes, of course there's a deadline for removing your Christmas decorations in town. At the beginning of Celebration's history, the rules were even stricter, with residents only being allowed to use certain colored curtains in their homes, and garbage bins had to be hidden and out of sight at all times, amongst other things. The creepiness that some people have felt while either living in or visiting Celebration was a result of Disney's plans, in a way. When the town was being constructed, only 6 types of houses were allowed to be built, each practically being a carbon copy of the other, and homes were only allowed to be painted white, yellow, pink, tan, or blue. At the beginning of the community's history, Disney also installed a number of bizarre features throughout town that added to the artificial feel. Mall-style shopping music was piped out in common town areas from speakers hidden in palm trees. Bird noises were played from other hidden speakers that were concealed within trees in residential areas. Fake snow was placed on rooftops during the winter months. And Disney even had a full-on ice rink installed near city center, which featured fake snow falling from trees. Residents and visitors have compared the feeling of being in Celebration to the movies The Truman Show and The Stepford Wives. It's almost too perfect. Something has to be wrong here.
And of course, there's plenty wrong with Celebration, Florida. In recent years, their public schools have been failing, losing students by the dozens, probably because they don't assign homework, grades, or even books, according to some reports. There are also segregation issues in the town, and some of the condominiums are rapidly deteriorating. In fact, in 2016, the residents of town center condominiums sued the town's new owners, a private firm named Lexan Capital, because their staircases were closed off. The condos had also suffered leaks and black mold, and on occasion the buildings would literally sway beneath the residents' feet. Then there are the swingers. On multiple occasions, residents of Celebration, speaking anonymously, have told members of the press that the town is full of those who choose to lead a, quote, alternative lifestyle. Orgies are very regular behind the closed doors in Celebration, and sex is a commodity.
The Death Pond is one of Celebration's darkest features. When you drive into the town, you're most likely going to be coming right off the highway, from a ramp that leads to a road that gets you into town. But when Celebration was first established, this road that led you to town from the highway was straight and then suddenly ended. There were no warnings that the road was about to abruptly end, and just beyond the intersection, through which you were supposed to make a turn, lies a deep, dark pond, which has now been nicknamed the Death Pond. There have been a number of cars that missed the turn and ended up submerged in this pond over the years, before additional safety measures were installed. But the most infamous incident occurred in the year 1998, when 3 friends named Scott Renquin, Dan Nelson, and Roger DeVernus disappeared near the Walt Disney World Resort. At the time, in 1998, nobody had any idea what had happened to the 3 friends. It seemed like they had just vanished into thin air. But 9 months later, the world would discover just what had happened to them when their car was discovered upside down beneath the murky depths of the pond's surface. When authorities located the vehicle and towed it out of the water, the badly decomposed bodies of all 3 friends were found inside. They had crashed their vehicle into the water and drowned. Another girl also died in the year 1998 after driving her car into the pond's waters. And from that point on, the area has been colloquially known as the Death Pond. Some say that the area is haunted, and I've actually been there in person and can confidently say that indeed, the Death Pond is creepy. But nowadays, they've got a massive sign in front of the pond that's illuminated 24/7 to deter people from making the same fatal mistake that so many others made over the years.
The first murder in Celebration occurred in 2010, and it was brutal. In November of that year, a man named Matteo Patrick Giovendito, a resident of Celebration and former teacher and lifelong Disney fan, was found slain inside of his home. He had been attacked with an axe and then strangled to death with a shoelace. The culprit? A 30-year-old homeless man named David Israel Zenon Murillo. While on the surface, this may seem like a completely random act of violence, a home invasion gone wrong, the story was much deeper and darker than one could imagine. David Israel, after his arrest, would claim that the victim, Matteo, had offered him money to wash his car and later invited him into his home and gave him beer. Shortly after drinking the beer, David Israel fell asleep and later woke up to Matteo on top of his unconscious body, attempting to sexually assault him. This allegedly caused David Israel to flip out. He then found a weapon inside of the home and killed Matteo. Now, this story may seem ridiculous, but after Matteo's murder, a number of his former students came forward and claimed that he had sexually assaulted them over the years while he was their teacher. A really good article about this from The Daily Beast, which features interviews from victims of Matteo's, alleges that he would let the young male students sleep over at his house. He would take them to amusement parks, and then he would touch them inappropriately. One former student even claimed that on one occasion, he had injured his hand, and Matteo offered to help him masturbate. While the truth behind these allegations may never be known, it definitely makes this murder even more disturbing.
The same week that Matteo was murdered in Celebration, another violent crime rocked the city. Just a few days after the brutal murder, a 52-year-old man named Craig Fushi, the owner of a failed security company, decided that he had had enough. He barricaded himself in his home and began opening fire at people. The police quickly arrived at his residence, and this began a 14-hour-long standoff between Craig and the authorities, during which he would open fire on officers multiple times from within his house. But eventually, after deploying tear gas into the home and breaking down the front door, authorities would find Craig dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The next murders in Celebration took place 9 years later in 2019, when an 84-year-old man and his 83-year-old wife were found dead from an apparent murder-suicide in their own home. But this brings us to the Tote family murders, which happened at the end of that same year.
The family was a perfect family from the outside looking in. There was 44-year-old husband, Anthony, 42-year-old wife, Megan, and their 3 children, 13-year-old Alec, 11-year-old Tyler, and 4-year-old Zoe. And they were all your definition of all-American. The family had moved from Connecticut to Celebration, Florida in the years before December of 2019. And from what we could find, it seemed like they were really enjoying their life. Anthony was a manager of his own physical therapy clinic, and Megan, a former yoga instructor who at one point worked with her husband at the clinic. She was now a stay-at-home mother, though, dedicated to raising her children right. Anthony himself frequently volunteered in his former community, and he spent his time working with disabled children, and he even coached youth soccer. But after moving to Celebration, this would all change.
In 2017, Megan contracted Lyme disease from a bug bite, supposedly during a trip to Walt Disney World. After her diagnosis, she allegedly became reserved, depressed, and isolated herself as much as she could in their new home in Celebration. Anthony, dealing with his wife's new illness and busy running a business thousands of miles away back in Connecticut, began gaining weight rapidly and was diagnosed with diabetes. And he also became depressed. Neighbors in Celebration barely knew the Totes, as they never attempted to socialize, rarely attended community events, and kept themselves and their children sheltered inside of their home. There was trouble brewing. Soon after the family moved to Celebration, authorities back in Connecticut discovered that Anthony had been committing insurance fraud, charging patients of his for care and procedures that they had never received. The money that Anthony had collected from this fraud was being used to pay for trips to Disney World, the home in Celebration, and day-to-day expenses. Before long, Anthony was over $100,000 in debt, the subject of lawsuits from 2 different financial firms, and being investigated by authorities. It's widely believed that Megan and the Totes' children had no idea of Anthony's fraudulent ways, debt, and trouble with the law, as he was the sole member of the family involved with a business which still remained back in Connecticut. Eventually, all of these financial woes reached a boiling point, and in late 2019, Anthony was informed that he and his family would soon be evicted from their Celebration home. And this, along with the building fraud charges and immense level of debt, seemed to be Anthony's breaking point.
It was the end of December of 2019. Suddenly, Anthony and Megan stop answering phone calls from relatives. No one can reach them. On December 31st, a deputy from the local sheriff's department stops by to leave an eviction notice on their door. Weeks pass and no one hears from Anthony, Megan, or the kids. Relatives back in Connecticut call the local sheriff's department a number of times, begging them to do a wellness check or to see if they can find a single member of the family. Deputies would visit the house in Celebration a total of 4 times in January of 2020. They looked for the family, knocking on doors, peeking through windows, but no one ever answered. Agents were also looking for Anthony because they finally had a warrant for his arrest on the aforementioned insurance fraud charges. On January 13th, after weeks of searching, federal agents who were surveilling the house witnessed Anthony walking around on the outside of the home. He was visibly shaking when he entered through the front door. Immediately, agents approached the door and knocked, but they received no response. What followed next was something straight out of a nightmare.
Once agents gained access to the home and walked through the front door, they noticed Anthony standing on the stairs. There was a foul odor in the air, and Anthony, shaking violently, told the authorities that he had recently tried to kill himself with Benadryl and that his wife was sleeping upstairs. They swiftly placed Anthony under arrest and began their search of the home. What they saw next would haunt them forever. Upstairs, inside one of the bedrooms, the authorities found 4 badly decomposed corpses, the bodies of Megan, Tyler, Alec, and Zoe. At first, the deputies couldn't find 4-year-old Zoe because her body had already decomposed so badly. But eventually, they located her corpse wrapped in a blanket at the foot of the bed, in front of her dead mother. Eventually, the authorities also found the family dog, Breezy, lying dead in another part of the home.
Anthony had killed his entire family. And while his story has changed many times over the 2 years since the murders, here is what essentially happened. At one point in late 2019 or early 2020, Anthony somehow gave his wife and children a toxic dose of Benadryl, an anti-allergy drug that is known to make people drowsy, either before or after each member fell asleep that evening. Anthony then smothered them to death with a pillow, one by one. Allegedly, he sat on his daughter's bed with her for hours before he decided to kill her. One of Anthony's sons had awoken while he was being smothered and fought back against his father, clawing at his skin and giving him scratches and bruises. Seeing no other option as his son fought against him, Anthony then grabbed a knife and stabbed his own child in the stomach, which ultimately led to his death. He then went through the house and stabbed his wife and other son in the stomach to make sure they were dead. Afterwards, he wrapped up all of the bodies in blankets and placed them in the master bedroom.
Judging by the state of decomposition that the bodies were in at the time that they were discovered, it was determined that Anthony had been living in the house with his dead family for weeks. When deputies made the gruesome discovery, they noted that the house was permeated with a foul odor. This makes the case all the more disturbing. After the murders, Anthony would change his story about what happened many times. At first, he claimed he wasn't home when the murders happened, and that his wife had killed the kids, then attempted to kill herself. Then, later, he stated that he and his wife had mutually decided to kill their family, in fear of the oncoming apocalypse. Yes, you heard that right. Tote told interrogators that he believed that everybody needed to die in order to pass over to the other side together, and he even claimed that he and his wife had sat the kids down, told them that they needed to die, and informed them that "we want to die with you." When Anthony was asked about the murder of his 4-year-old daughter Zoe, he stated, quote, "I needed to save her soul. I wanted her to be with us," end quote. During his videotaped confession, Anthony even told detectives that he wanted to join his family on the other side, stating, "That's where I want to be." After a lengthy trial, Anthony Tote was recently convicted of all 4 murders and sentenced to life in prison. Nobody bought his story about his wife being involved in the slayings. In the eyes of the jury, this was an act carried out by Anthony, and by Anthony alone. During his sentencing, the judge called Anthony a destroyer of worlds, and thus ended the sordid case of the Celebration family annihilation. Walt Disney World, a place of magic, a place of wonder, the happiest place on earth. But is it really that happy? With such a macabre history lying just beneath the surface, it seems that even Disney World is not immune to the dark ways of the real world. Disney World is supposed to be a place where you go to escape the troubles of everyday life and fade away into a playful, family-friendly fantasy. But what happens when that dream is suddenly turned into a nightmare? There's a lot of darkness at Disney World, if you know where to look. And it seems like the happiest place on earth sometimes might not be that happy after all.